She married a disabled man, but a big surprise awaited her at the wedding. He was rich, handsome, and confined to a wheelchair. She married him, not knowing the man she was about to vow her life to was hiding a shocking truth. Would you marry someone knowing you'll spend the rest of your life as their caretaker? Let me know in the comments. This story explores the beauty and complexity of human relationships, how love isn't always what we expect it to look like, and how people often carry hidden truths, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of protection, or even heartbreak. It's about a caramel-skinned American woman named Janelle Morris, a strong, warm-hearted woman with a past that shaped her more than she'd ever admit. She never imagined herself marrying a man she didn't choose, especially not one in a wheelchair. But life pushed her into that corner, and the man, Rhett Callahan, was not who he appeared to be. What started as a marriage of sacrifice soon turned into a twisted love story filled with secrets, unexpected turns, and ultimately, healing. This story touches on grief, betrayal, mystery, resilience, and the unexplainable pull two souls can have toward each other. There's lust, yes, but also forgiveness, rebirth, and an ending that will make you believe in love again. Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. Before we begin, I would be glad to know that these lessons get to people in different parts of the world, so please let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Thank you for joining our growing community. Let us begin. Janelle slumped into the cracked leather booth at the diner, her apron still tied around her waist, grease stains smudging the edges. The air smelled of burnt coffee and stale fries, and the hum of the ceiling fan did little to cut through the heat. She rubbed her temples, her fingers trembling from the 16-hour shift she'd just finished. Her phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with another text from her landlord. Rent's due. No more extensions. She swiped it away, her chest tightening. Another buzz followed, her brother's nurse. Meds are running low. Call me. She didn't have the energy to reply. Not tonight. The bell above the door chimed, and Brielle slid into the seat across from her, her heels clicking against the linoleum. She dropped a thick manila envelope onto the table with a thud, her glossy nails tapping the edge. Brielle was all sharp edges, perfect hair, tailored jacket, a woman who looked like she'd never known a late bill or a sleepless night. Janelle envied her for it, even if she'd never admit it. "You look like hell," Brielle said, her voice smooth but cutting. She slid a cup of black coffee toward Janelle. "Drink. You'll need it for what I'm about to say." Janelle didn't touch the cup. "If it's about another job, I'm already drowning. 2's my limit." Brielle leaned forward, her eyes glinting with something Janelle couldn't place. Excitement, maybe, or something heavier. "Not a job, a lifeline. Hear me out before you say no." Janelle sighed, leaning back in the booth. 5 minutes. That's all I've got before I crash. Brielle opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers, spreading them across the table like a dealer laying out cards. "You know my uncle's law firm. One of his clients needs something unconventional, a marriage, temporary, 1 year, and you'd be set. Hospital bills, rent, all of it. Gone." Janelle's stomach twisted. She stared at the papers, the words blurring under the diner's flickering lights. A marriage? To who? Some creep I've never met? Brielle hesitated just for a second, and that pause made Janelle's pulse quicken. "His name's Rhett Callahan. He's complicated, rich, private, and yeah, he's in a wheelchair, but this isn't about love or romance or any of that mess you've given up on. It's a deal, plain and simple." Janelle's laugh was sharp, bitter. "You're insane. I'm not marrying some stranger who can't even walk. I don't care how much money's on the table. I still want—" She stopped, her voice catching. "I still want something real, even if I don't believe in it anymore." Brielle's expression softened, but her tone stayed firm. Real won't pay for your brother's chemo. Real won't keep a roof over your head. This will. You'd be stupid to turn it down. Janelle shoved the papers back across the table, her hands shaking. I'd be stupid to say yes. What's the catch? Nobody throws money at a desperate waitress for nothing. Brielle leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. He needs a wife to secure his inheritance. Some family trust thing. I don't know the details. Uncle wouldn't spill. But it's legit. You sign, you play the part for a year, and you walk away with enough to start over. For you and Caleb. The mention of her brother's name hit like a punch. Janelle's eyes stung, and she blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Caleb, pale and fragile in that hospital bed, his crooked smile fading with every visit. She'd promised him she'd fix this, promised him he'd get better. But promises didn't pay bills. How much? She asked, her voice barely audible. Brielle slid a single sheet forward, a number scrawled in bold ink. Janelle's breath caught. It was more than she'd make in 10 years at the diner and the gas station combined, enough to cover Caleb's treatment, the rent, and then some. Enough to breathe. I need to think, Janelle said, pushing the paper away. This isn't a yes. Brielle smirked, gathering the papers back into the envelope. Think fast. They want an answer by tomorrow. I'll text you the meeting spot if you're in. Janelle didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her lumpy mattress, the springs creaking under her weight, staring at the peeling paint on the wall. The apartment was silent except for the drip of the faucet she couldn't afford to fix. Her phone sat beside her, Brielle's text glowing in the dark. Noon. Callahan's estate. Say yes or don't show. Janelle's mind raced, images of Caleb's frail hands, the eviction notice taped to her door, the endless shifts that left her hollow. And then, unbidden, the question, what kind of man buys a wife? By morning, she'd made her choice, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. The drive to the Callahan estate was a blur of winding roads and towering oaks, the kind of place that felt like it belonged in a painting she'd never afford. The house loomed ahead, all stone and glass, sprawling across manicured lawns. Janelle parked her rusting sedan next to a sleek black car that probably cost more than her life, her stomach churning as she stepped out. Brielle was waiting by the front steps, her smile tight. "You're here," Brielle said. "Good. He's inside." Janelle adjusted her faded jacket, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked. "He better not expect me to curtsy." Brielle laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just be yourself. Well, maybe a little less prickly." The foyer was a cathedral of marble and silence, the kind of quiet that pressed against your ears. A woman in a crisp suit led them down a hall lined with portraits, stern faces staring down, their eyes following her every step. Janelle's boots echoed too loudly, and she hated how small she felt. They stopped at a set of double doors, and the woman knocked once before pushing them open. Rhett Callahan sat by a massive window, the sunlight framing him like some kind of fallen king. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, his dark hair swept back, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass. His wheelchair gleamed, all sleek lines and polished metal, but it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Gray, piercing, like they could see straight through her and didn't care what they found. A stack of papers rested on the table beside him, a pen balanced on top. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice low and steady, no trace of warmth. "Sit." Janelle didn't move. "I'm not a dog." His lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Noted. Please, sit." She dropped into the chair across from him, her arms crossed. Brielle lingered by the door, but Rhett waved her off with a flick of his hand. She left without a word, the doors clicking shut behind her. The room felt smaller now, the air thick with something Janelle couldn't name. I assume Brielle explained the terms, Rhett said, his fingers tapping the papers once before going still. 1 year, a marriage on paper. You live here, play the part, and when it's over, you're free. With compensation, Janelle studied him, searching for a crack in that calm facade. Why me? You don't know me. I don't need to, he said, his gaze unwavering. You're convenient. You need money. I need a wife. It's a transaction, nothing more. Her throat tightened. And what's in it for you? Some rich guy trust fund? His jaw tightened just for a second before smoothing out. Something like that? The details aren't your concern. They are if I'm signing my life away, she shot back. I'm not here to be your puppet. Rhett leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. You're not. You're here to save yourself, and whoever it is you're bleeding yourself dry for. I don't ask for affection. I don't ask for anything beyond what's in that contract. You'll have your space, your life. Just wear the ring. Janelle's fingers curled into fists in her lap. She hated how right he was, how he'd already pegged her desperation. And after the year, you walk away, richer, untouched, if that's what you're worried about. She flinched at the word, her cheeks burning. Don't flatter yourself. I'm not worried about that. Good, he said, sliding the contract toward her. Then read it, sign it, or leave. She didn't touch the papers, not yet. What happens if I say no? Rhett's eyes darkened, and for the first time she saw something flicker beneath that icy surface, something raw, almost dangerous. Then I find someone else. But you go back to whatever hole you're clawing your way out of. Your choice. The words landed like stones, heavy and cold. Janelle stared at the contract, the pen glinting beside it. Her mind spun with questions she didn't dare ask. Why the rush? Why the secrecy? What was he hiding behind that polished exterior? She thought of Caleb, of the hospital bills piling up, of the landlord's threats. She thought of herself, trapped in a cycle she couldn't break. Give me a pen, she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Rhett handed it over without a word, his expression unreadable. She signed her name in quick, sharp strokes, the ink bleeding into the page. When she slid the contract back, their fingers brushed, just for a second, and she pulled back like she'd been burned. Done, she said, standing. Now what? He watched her, his gaze lingering too long. Now you move in. Tomorrow. We'll be married by the end of the week. Janelle nodded, her heart pounding. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. Janelle. She froze, glancing back. Don't ask questions you won't like the answers to. She didn't respond. She walked out, the weight of his words sinking into her bones, a quiet promise of something she couldn't yet see, something waiting, coiled and unseen, just beyond the horizon of that sprawling estate. Janelle stood in the foyer of the Callahan estate, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, the contract's weight heavier than the clothes she'd packed. The air was cool, sharp with the scent of polished wood and something faintly floral, but it did nothing to ease the knot in her chest. Rhett's words echoed in her mind. Don't ask questions you won't like the answers to, and she shoved them down, focusing on the woman in the crisp suit who'd appeared to guide her upstairs. Her name was Marta, she'd said, her voice clipped and professional, her eyes avoiding Janelle's. Your room's this way, Marta murmured, leading her up a grand staircase that curved like a spine. Janelle's boots thudded against the marble, too loud in the silence. She glanced back once, half expecting Rhett to be watching from below, but the foyer was empty. The wedding was set for Friday, 3 days from now, and she still didn't know what she'd signed up for. Not really. The room Marta showed her to was bigger than her entire apartment, all soft grays and creams, a bed that looked untouched by human hands. A window stretched floor to ceiling, overlooking the sprawling lawns. And for a moment, Janelle let herself imagine what it'd be like to belong here. Then she remembered. She didn't. She was a hired piece in Rhett's game, nothing more. Mr. Callahan prefers his privacy, Marta said, lingering by the door. Meals are at 7. Stay out of the West Wing. Any questions? Janelle dropped her bag onto the floor, the thud echoing. Yeah. Where's he at now? Marta's lips pressed into a thin line. Working. He'll see you when he's ready. She left before Janelle could push further, the door clicking shut with a finality that made her skin prickle. That night she called Caleb. His voice was weak but bright through the phone, a lifeline in the sterile quiet of the mansion. You're living where now? He teased, coughing softly. Sounds like a movie. More like a bad dream, she said, forcing a laugh. But it's temporary. For you. He went quiet, and she could picture his frown, the way his brows pinched when he worried. Just be careful. Rich people are weird. She hung up with a promise to visit soon, but sleep wouldn't come. The house creaked around her, old bones settling, and she told herself it was nothing, just a place too big for its own good. But as she drifted off, a faint thud jolted her awake, distant and muffled, like something heavy hitting the floor. She held her breath, listening, but it didn't come again. Not that night. The wedding was a blur of cold efficiency, a judge in a black robe, 2 signatures, a ring that felt like a shackle on her finger. Rhett sat beside her, his expression blank, his hands steady as he signed. He didn't look at her once, not during the vows, not after. When it was done, he wheeled away without a word, leaving her standing in the study with Marta and a man she hadn't met yet, Griffin, Rhett's assistant. Thin, jittery, with eyes that darted like a trapped animal's. Welcome to the family, Griffin said, his smile twitching. He handed her a key card, access to her new life, he called it. She didn't like the way his fingers lingered on hers, or the way he glanced at the door Rhett had disappeared through. Thanks, she muttered, pocketing the card. Guess I'm official now. Griffin nodded too quickly. Yeah. Official, just stick to the rules, okay? He scurried off before she could ask what he meant, leaving her alone with the echo of his unease. Life in the mansion settled into a rhythm she couldn't quite grasp. Days bled into nights, marked by meals she ate alone in a dining room that could seat 20, the clink of her fork against porcelain deafening in the silence. Rhett was a ghost. There one moment, gone the next, his wheelchair humming down halls she didn't dare follow him through. When they did cross paths, he was all sharp edges and clipped words, his gray eyes sliding past her like she was furniture. Morning, she'd say, testing the waters. Morning, he'd reply, already turning away, his tone flat as the marble floors. She told herself she didn't care. This was a job, not a marriage. But the house wouldn't let her forget it was more than that. The noises started small, scratches in the walls, a low hum she couldn't place. At first she blamed the pipes, the wind, anything rational. But then came the footsteps, heavy and deliberate, pacing somewhere above her room in the dead of night. She'd lie there, eyes wide, counting each one until they stopped, always just before dawn. One evening she found Griffin in the kitchen, his hands trembling as he poured coffee. The pot clattered against the counter, spilling dark liquid across the granite. He cursed under his breath, grabbing a towel, and Janelle stepped in, her curiosity outweighing her caution. Rough day? She asked, leaning against the doorway. He jumped, the towel slipping from his grip. Mrs. Callahan, Janelle, I didn't see you. Clearly, she said, crossing her arms. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Griffin's laugh was brittle, his eyes flicking to the hall behind her. Just tired. Long hours. You know how it is. She didn't, not really, but she nodded anyway. Rhett's a tough boss, huh? His face paled and he busied himself with the towel, scrubbing the counter harder than necessary. He's particular, likes things a certain way. Like what? She pressed, stepping closer. Griffin froze, his knuckles white against the cloth. Before she could dig deeper, he bolted, leaving the coffee pooling on the counter. Janelle stared after him, the air buzzing with questions. What was he so afraid of? And why did it feel like Rhett was at the center of it? The West Wing became her obsession. Marta had mentioned it once, stay out, and Rhett never went near it, his wheelchair tracks veering away whenever he passed the hall that led there. The door was heavy oak, no handle, just a keypad glowing faintly red. She'd stood in front of it one afternoon, her fingers hovering over the numbers, when Rhett's voice cut through the silence. Step away. She turned, heart slamming against her ribs. He was there, 10 feet back, his face a mask of calm fury. What's in there? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Nothing you need to know, he said, wheeling closer. I told you not to ask questions. And I told you I'm not a puppet, she snapped. If I'm living here, I deserve to know what's going on. His eyes locked onto hers, cold and unyielding. You're here because I paid you to be. That's all the deserving you get. She held his gaze, refusing to flinch. Keep your secrets, then. But don't expect me to play dumb. He didn't respond, just turned and left, the hum of his chair fading down the hall. She stared at the door, her pulse racing. Whatever was behind it, it wasn't nothing, and she'd find out one way or another. The noises grew louder after that. A crash one night, sharp and jarring, yanked her from sleep. She stumbled to the door, peering into the hall, but it was empty. Moonlight slicing through the windows, casting jagged shapes across the floor. Another night she heard voices, low and urgent, filtering through the walls. She pressed her ear to the plaster, catching fragments. Not yet. And she can't know. Before they faded into silence. Griffin's fear became a mirror for her own. She caught him watching Rhett once, his hands twisting in his lap, sweat beading on his forehead. Rhett didn't notice, or didn't care, his focus on a stack of papers, his pen moving in quick, precise strokes. When Griffin met Janelle's eyes, he looked away fast, like he'd been caught. What's his deal? She asked Marta one morning, cornering her in the laundry room. Griffin's a wreck around him. Marta folded a towel with mechanical precision, her lips tight. He's been with Mr. Callahan a long time. Knows him better than most. That's not an answer, Janelle said, leaning in. What's Rhett hiding? Marta's hands stilled, her eyes darting to the door. You're asking the wrong person, and the wrong questions. Then who should I ask? Janelle pressed. Marta didn't reply, just brushed past her, the towel clutched like a shield. Janelle's frustration boiled over, but she let it go, for now. The breaking point came a week later. She woke to a scream, sharp and fleeting, swallowed by the house's endless quiet. She bolted upright, her breath ragged, and grabbed the keycard from her nightstand. The hall was dark, the air thick with something she couldn't name, fear, maybe, or anticipation. She moved toward the West Wing, barefoot and silent, the scream still ringing in her ears. The door loomed ahead, the keypad's red light pulsing like a heartbeat. She swiped the card, half expecting it to fail, but the lock clicked, and the door swung open with a groan. Inside was darkness, thick and heavy, and a smell, metallic, sharp, like blood. Her hand fumbled for a switch, and when the lights flickered on, her breath caught. The room was bare except for a single chair in the center, straps dangling from its arms. A table sat nearby, covered in tools, gleaming, precise, wrong. And on the wall, a photograph. Rhett standing, his legs strong and steady, no wheelchair in sight. Janelle's knees buckled. The scream hadn't been a dream. And Rhett, her husband, wasn't who he said he was. Janelle stood frozen in the doorway of the West Wing, the photograph of Rhett, standing, whole, alive in a way she'd never seen, burning into her vision. The room's stark emptiness pressed against her, the straps on the chair glinting under the harsh light, the metallic tang in the air clawing at her throat. Her mind spun, questions colliding. Who was he really? What was this place? The scream she'd heard, had it come from here? She stumbled back, her hand fumbling for the key card still clutched in her grip, and the door thudded shut behind her, sealing the secret away. But it wasn't sealed in her. Not anymore. She didn't sleep after that. She lay in bed, eyes tracing the ceiling, every creak of the mansion a taunt. Rhett's face floated behind her lids, those gray eyes, that cold mask, and now that photograph. Standing. She'd married a man she didn't know, but this was deeper, stranger, a puzzle with pieces she couldn't force together. By morning, her resolve hardened. She'd watch him, closer than he watched her. Life in the mansion shifted after that night. Rhett was still a ghost, slipping through the halls with that quiet hum of his wheelchair, but Janelle started catching him in moments he didn't expect. A glance over his shoulder when she entered the dining room, his fork pausing mid-air. A flicker of his eyes in the study, tracking her as she crossed to the window. He thought she didn't see, thought his mask held firm, but she did, and it fueled her. "Morning," she said one day, lingering by the coffee pot, her voice casual but her gaze sharp. "Morning," he replied, his tone flat as ever, but his fingers tightened on the armrest of his chair. Just for a second. She filed it away, a crack in the ice. Griffin was no help. He'd turned into a shadow of himself, skittish and silent, avoiding her questions with mumbled excuses. "Busy," he'd say, or "Ask Marta," before darting off. Marta was worse, stone-faced, her answers clipped to nothing. "Mr. Callahan's business is his own," she'd told Janelle once, folding linens with that same mechanical precision. And that was that. The house itself seemed to guard its secrets, the noises persisting, scratches, thuds, those pacing footsteps she couldn't pin down. But Janelle wasn't letting go. It was late past midnight when it happened. She'd been restless, pacing her room, the keycard a weight in her pocket. The West Wing pulled at her, but she resisted, barely. Instead, she slipped into the hall, her bare feet silent on the cool floor, drawn by a sound she couldn't place. A soft clink, metal on metal coming from downstairs. She followed it, her pulse a steady drum in her ears, until she reached the library. The door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hall. She pressed herself against the wall, peering through the gap. Rhett was there, his wheelchair pushed aside, and he was standing. Tall, steady, his back to her as he reached for a book on a high shelf. Janelle's breath caught, her mind reeling. The photograph, the straps, the lies. And then he faltered. His legs buckled, a sharp gasp escaping him as he grabbed the shelf, books tumbling to the floor. He hit the ground hard, his hands scrabbling for purchase, and Janelle couldn't stop herself. She burst in, the door banging against the wall. "Rhett!" He froze, his head snapping up, those gray eyes wide with something she'd never seen in him. Panic. For a moment they stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken things. Then he pulled himself together, his face hardening as he dragged himself back into the wheelchair, his movements jerky but practiced. "Get out," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "What the hell was that?" Janelle demanded, stepping closer. "You were standing. You told me—" "Muscle spasms," he cut in, his tone sharp enough to slice through her. "It happens. Means nothing." She laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "Nothing. I saw you, Rhett. You were up, reaching, like it was normal. Don't lie to me." He wheeled toward her, fast, stopping inches away. "I'm not lying. It's involuntary. A glitch. You don't know what you're talking about." "Then explain it," she shot back, her hands curling into fists. Explain the room in the West Wing, the picture of you standing, the noises, all of it. His jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. You went in there. Yeah, she said, defiant. And I'm not sorry. What are you hiding? He didn't answer, just stared at her, his eyes boring into hers like he could will her silent. But she wouldn't budge. Tell me, Rhett, or I walk, contract or not. You won't, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You need this too much. Her stomach twisted. He was right, damn him. But she didn't flinch. Try me. For a moment she thought he might crack, might let something slip. But then he turned away, wheeling toward the door. Go to bed, Janelle. We're done here. She watched him go, her chest heaving, the library silent except for the echo of his words. She wasn't done, not even close. The next day he was colder than ever, his responses clipped to single syllables. But she caught him watching her again, across the dining table, through the glass of the conservatory, his gaze lingering when he thought she wouldn't notice. It wasn't suspicion, not quite. It was something else, something heavier, and it made her skin prickle. She tested him. Small things, lingering in doorways, brushing past his chair, letting her voice soften when she spoke. Pass the salt, she'd say, and his hand would hesitate before sliding it over, his eyes flicking to hers and away. She didn't know what she was looking for, anger, guilt, something to break him open. But she kept pushing. One afternoon she found him in the study, papers spread across the desk, his pen moving in those quick, precise strokes. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Working hard? He didn't look up. Always. On what? She asked, stepping inside. The inheritance you needed me for. His pen stilled, but he didn't answer. She moved closer, peering at the papers, numbers, dates, nothing she could make sense of. What's it all for, Rhett? Why the charade? He slammed the pen down, the sound sharp in the quiet. Stop. Stop what? She said, meeting his glare. Asking. Caring. I'm your wife, remember? His laugh was bitter, jagged. On paper, that's all. Then why do you keep watching me? She shot back. Every time I turn around, you're there. What's that about? He went still, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. You're imagining things. Am I? She leaned in, her voice low. Or are you scared I'll figure you out? He didn't flinch, but his eyes darkened, a storm brewing behind them. You're fishing, Janelle. You won't like what you catch. Maybe I will, she said, straightening. Maybe I already have. She left him there, her heart pounding, the air between them crackling with something new, something alive. That night the noises were louder, a rhythmic thudding she couldn't ignore. She followed it, her keycard in hand, back to the West Wing. The door opened with that same groan, and she stepped inside, the light flickering on. The chair was gone, the table too. The room was empty, scrubbed clean, except for one thing, a scrap of paper on the floor, folded tight. She picked it up, her fingers trembling as she opened it. 2 words, scrawled in Rhett's sharp hand. Leave now. Her breath hitched. She spun, half expecting him behind her, but the room was silent. She pocketed the note and ran, the mansion's shadows stretching around her, every corner hiding something she couldn't yet see. The next morning, Rhett was gone. Marta said he'd left at dawn. Business, she claimed, but Janelle didn't buy it. She searched the house, her steps quickening with every empty room, until she found Griffin in the garage, loading a bag into a car. Where is he? She demanded, grabbing his arm. Griffin flinched, his eyes wild. Gone. I don't know. He just said to pack. Pack what? She pressed. What's happening? He shook her off, his voice cracking. You shouldn't have gone in there. You shouldn't have pushed. Pushed what? She shouted, but he was already in the car, the engine roaring to life. She pounded on the window as he peeled out, dust choking the air, leaving her alone in the cavernous garage. Back inside, she found the study locked, the west wing door sealed tighter than before. The note burned in her pocket, a warning she didn't understand. Rhett's absence was a void, but his presence lingered. Those glances, that fall, the cracks she'd pried open. She didn't know if he was running from her or something else, but one thing was clear. The ice was breaking, and whatever lay beneath was rising fast. If you found out your husband could walk after pretending all along, what would you do? Would you leave or stay? Drop your thoughts below. Janelle stood in the empty garage, the echo of Griffin's tires fading into the stillness, her fist clenched around the crumpled note. Leave now. The words seared into her, a warning she couldn't decipher, but they didn't scare her off. They lit a fire. Rhett was gone, the house a hollow shell without him, and yet she felt him everywhere, those fleeting glances, that fall in the library, the photograph of him standing tall. She stormed back inside, the note a hot coal in her pocket, her mind racing. He could run, but she wouldn't, not until she had answers. The days blurred into a restless haze. Marta lingered like a specter, her answers vague. He'll return when he's ready. And the mansion's noises grew bolder, sharper. A creak became a groan, a thud, a slam, until Janelle stopped pretending they were nothing. She searched the study, the west wing, every corner she could reach, but the locks held firm, the secrets buried deeper than she could dig. The note stayed with her, a taunt, a tether, and every night she traced its jagged script, willing it to speak. He came back on a Tuesday, the sky heavy with clouds, the air thick with coming rain. She heard the hum of his wheelchair before she saw him rolling through the foyer like he'd never left. Her heart lurched, relief, anger, something she couldn't name, and she met him there, barefoot and furious, her hair wild from sleepless nights. "Where were you?" she demanded, blocking his path. Rhett's face was a mask, but his eyes betrayed him, exhausted, shadowed, flickering over her like he couldn't help it. "Away," he said, his voice rougher than she remembered. "Move." "No," she snapped, stepping closer. "You don't get to disappear after that, after the note. What the hell is going on, Rhett?" He wheeled past her, fast, but she followed, her voice rising. "You told me to leave. Why? What are you afraid of?" He stopped at the base of the stairs, his hands gripping the armrests, knuckles white. "I'm not afraid," he said, but it sounded like a lie, brittle and thin. "Then look at me," she said, circling to face him. "Look at me and tell me the truth." He did, finally, those gray eyes locking onto hers, and she saw it, a crack, raw and jagged, splitting through his calm. "You shouldn't be here," he said, quieter now. "You should have gone." "Why?" she pressed, her voice trembling. "Because of the room? The picture? You standing? I saw it, Rhett. I know you're hiding something." His jaw tightened and he looked away, the mask slipping back into place. "You don't know anything." "Then tell me," she shouted, her hands shaking. "I'm your wife. On paper, fine. But I'm here, living this with you. The noises, the secrets, you falling. I can't keep pretending it's nothing. I deserve more than your silence." He flinched, just barely, but she caught it. "You deserve what I paid you for," he said, but the words lacked their usual bite. "No," she said, stepping closer, her voice dropping. "You don't get to decide that. Not anymore." He stared at her, the air between them coiling tight, and then he moved, his hand reaching for hers, stopping short, hovering. "Janelle," he said, her name a fracture in his voice, "you don't understand what you're asking." "Then make me," she whispered, closing the gap, her fingers brushing his. "Please." He pulled back, sharp, like her touch burned, but his eyes stayed on her, hungry, conflicted, alive in a way she'd never seen. "I can't," he said, but it sounded like I won't, and she wouldn't let it stand. She knelt in front of him, leveling their gazes, her heart pounding against her ribs. You've been watching me for weeks. Don't deny it. I feel it, Rhett. Every time I'm near you. So why fight it? Why run? His breath hitched, and for a moment she thought he'd push her away again. But then he leaned forward, slow, deliberate, his hand cupping her face, thumb tracing her jaw. Because you'll hate me, he murmured, his voice breaking. When you know. I don't hate you now, she said, her eyes stinging. And I've seen enough. He closed his eyes, a shudder running through him. And then he kissed her. It was sudden, fierce, his lips crashing into hers like he'd been holding it back too long. She froze, stunned, then melted into it, her hands gripping his shoulders, the world narrowing to the heat of him, the taste of him, salt and storm and something desperate. He pulled her closer, his fingers tangling in her hair, and she felt the tremble in him, the fight he was losing. They broke apart, gasping, his forehead pressed to hers. This doesn't change anything, he said, but his voice was wrecked, his hands still on her. It changes everything, she shot back, breathless, and kissed him again, harder, pouring every question, every fear into it. He didn't resist this time, just surrendered, pulling her onto his lap, the wheelchair creaking under their weight. The night unraveled from there, a tangle of emotion and need. They stumbled, him wheeling, her following, upstairs to his room, a place she'd never been. It was sparse, all dark wood and sharp lines, but the bed was wide, soft, and they fell into it, clothes shedding in a frantic rush. His hands were everywhere, mapping her skin, and hers found the scars on his legs, faint, jagged lines he didn't explain. She didn't ask, not then. It was too much. The way he whispered her name, the way he clung to her like she was air, the way her heart cracked open despite every wall she'd built. After they lay there, tangled in sheets, the silence heavy with what they hadn't said. His arm draped over her, his breathing uneven, and she traced the lines of his face in the dim light, memorizing him. What now? She asked, her voice small. He didn't answer, just pulled her closer, his lips brushing her temple. But the quiet didn't last. A thud echoed through the house, sharp and close, and she tensed, her eyes darting to the door. It's nothing, he murmured, but his grip tightened, belying his words. She didn't believe him, not after everything. But she stayed, her body pressed to his, the warmth of him anchoring her against the storm she felt, brewing inside. The days after were a haze of stolen moments and unspoken truths. He'd find her in the kitchen, his chair silent as he pulled her into a kiss, or she'd catch him in the study, his guard down, a smile flickering before he hid it. She was falling, hard, fast, against every instinct, and it terrified her, because the house wouldn't let her forget. The noises grew louder, more insistent, footsteps pacing above, a low hum vibrating through the walls. She'd wake alone sometimes, Rhett gone, the bed cold, and find him in the hall, staring at nothing, his face pale. "Where do you go?" she asked one morning, catching him by the stairs, his hands trembling. "Nowhere," he said, too quick, his eyes sliding past her. "Stop it," she snapped, grabbing his arm. "You're pulling away again, after everything." He looked at her then, raw, unguarded. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" she demanded, her voice rising. "The truth? Me?" "Both," he said, and the word hung there, heavy, final. She let go, stepping back, her chest tight. "I'm not fragile, Rhett. I can handle it." He shook his head, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "You think you can. That's the problem." She didn't know what to say to that, so she walked away, her mind spinning. She was losing herself, her grip on reality, her sense of what was real. The photograph, the room, his fall, their night together. It all blurred, a kaleidoscope of doubt. Was he playing her? Was she imagining the shift in him, the way he softened when she touched him? Or was it worse? Was something breaking loose, something he couldn't control? That night she heard it again, the scream, sharp and piercing, cutting through her dreams. She bolted upright, Rhett beside her, his eyes already open, wide with something like dread. "Stay here," he said, reaching for his chair, but she was faster, out of bed, pulling on a shirt. "No," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "I'm done staying." He grabbed her wrist hard. "Janelle, please." She yanked free, staring him down. "You don't get to decide anymore." She ran, barefoot, toward the sound, down the hall to the west wing. The door was unlocked, swinging open at her touch, and she stepped inside, the air cold, thick with that metallic bite. The room was different, cluttered now, a table strewn with papers, a chair overturned, and in the corner a figure huddled, shaking, a man she didn't know, his eyes wild as they met hers. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He didn't answer, just pointed behind her. She turned, and there was Rhett, in the doorway, standing, his face a mask of anguish. "Janelle," he said, his voice breaking, "you shouldn't have come." Janelle's breath caught in her throat as she stared at Rhett, standing in the doorway of the west wing, his frame rigid with something she couldn't name, grief, fear, guilt. Behind her, the stranger whimpered, a sound that clawed at her nerves, and she spun back to him, her pulse hammering. He was thin, disheveled, his clothes torn, his eyes darting between her and Rhett like a trapped animal. The room's clutter, scattered papers, an overturned chair, felt like a crime scene she'd stumbled into, and Rhett's voice, raw and broken, echoed in her skull. "You shouldn't have come." "Who is he?" she demanded, her voice shaking as she stepped toward Rhett. "What is this?" Rhett didn't move, his legs steady beneath him, no trace of the wheelchair she'd tied to his identity. "Go back to bed," he said, quieter now. But it wasn't a request, it was a plea. "No," she snapped, closing the distance, her hands trembling. "You don't get to shut me out. Not after everything." Her mind flashed to their night together, the heat of his skin, the way he'd whispered her name like a confession. "Tell me the truth." His eyes met hers, dark and stormy, and for a moment she thought he might. But then the stranger lunged, scrambling past her toward the door, and Rhett moved, fast, too fast, grabbing him, pinning him against the wall with a strength she didn't know he had. The man thrashed, a choked cry escaping him, and Janelle stumbled back, her heart in her throat. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "Rhett, let him go!" He didn't. His grip tightened, his face a mask of cold fury, and the man went limp, his head lolling. Rhett released him, letting him crumple to the floor, and turned to her, his chest heaving. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You can't." "Then make me," she said, tears burning her eyes. "Because I'm losing my mind here, and you're the only thing keeping me from falling apart." He stepped toward her, his hand reaching out, but then he stopped, his expression fracturing. "I can't," he whispered, and he turned away, leaving her with the stranger's shallow breathing and 1,000 questions she couldn't answer. She didn't follow him. Not that time. She sank to the floor, her knees weak, the papers crunching beneath her. One caught her eye, a medical report, dates and jargon she couldn't parse, but Rhett's name jumped out, bold and black. She stuffed it in her pocket, her hands shaking, and stumbled back to her room, the stranger's face haunting her, Rhett's standing form burned into her memory. The next morning, he was gone again. No note, no explanation, just Marta's tight-lipped "he'll be back," and a house that felt like a cage. Janelle's world tilted, her love for him warring with the chaos he'd dragged her into. She didn't know who he was anymore, but she couldn't let go. Not yet. 3 days later, the doorbell rang, a sharp jolt through the mansion's silence. Janelle answered it, expecting Griffin or some delivery, but instead she found Arden, her ex, standing on the steps, his leather jacket scuffed, his dark hair longer than she remembered. His grin faltered when he saw her, replaced by a flicker of shock, then something harder. "Janie," he said, his voice smooth, familiar, a knife she'd forgotten could cut. "Heard you're living fancy now." She froze, her hand tight on the doorframe. "Arden, what are you doing here?" He stepped closer, his eyes raking over her, then past her into the foyer's gleaming expanse. "Came to see you. Word's out you're hitched, to some rich cripple no less. Didn't believe it till now." Her stomach twisted, anger flaring. "He's not." "Don't call him that. And how'd you even find me?" "People talk," he said, shrugging, but his smile was too sharp. "You ghosted me, Janie, after everything. Figured I'd check in, see if you're okay." "I'm fine," she lied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "You need to go." He didn't move, just leaned against the railing, casual but coiled. "Fine, huh? Married a billionaire and you're still looking like you haven't slept in weeks. What's he got you tangled in?" "Nothing," she said, too quick, and his eyes narrowed. "Right," he drawled, stepping past her into the foyer before she could stop him. "Place like this, money like that. There's always something, and I know you, Janie. You don't settle for nothing." She grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Get out, Arden. This isn't your business." He turned, his hand catching hers, holding it too long. "It is if I want you back. We were good, you and me, before you ran off to play house with some guy who can't even walk." "He's more than that," she snapped, yanking free, her face burning. "And we were never good. You left me drowning in debt while you chased every skirt in town." His grin faded, replaced by something raw. "I messed up. I know it. But I'm here now, and I'm not letting you go that easy. Not to him." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "You don't get a say. I'm married. Done." "Married for what?" he pressed, his voice dropping. "Love? Or cash? 'Cause I'm betting it's the latter, and I can work with that." Before she could answer, the hum of Rhett's wheelchair cut through the tension. He rolled into the foyer, his face unreadable, but his eyes locked on Arden with a cold intensity that made her shiver. "Who's this?" he asked, his tone flat, dangerous. Arden smirked, unfazed. "The ex, Arden. You must be the husband. Nice wheels." Rhett didn't flinch, just wheeled closer, stopping beside Janelle. "You're trespassing. Leave." "Not till I get what I came for," Arden said, his gaze sliding to Janelle. "Her." "She's not yours," Rhett said, his voice steel, and Janelle felt his hand brush hers, brief, possessive, grounding her. Arden's jaw tightened, but he stepped back, hands up. "We'll see. I'll be around, Janie. Think about it." He left, the door slamming behind him, and Janelle exhaled, her knees weak. Rhett turned to her, his eyes searching. "You okay?" "No," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I'm glad you're here." He nodded, his hand lingering near hers, but he didn't touch her again. "He'll be back," he said. And it wasn't a question. She knew he was right. Arden didn't quit, not when he wanted something, and now he wanted her and Rhett's money. That night she found a note slipped under her door. Arden's scrawl. "Meet me tomorrow. We need to talk." She crumpled it, but the unease stayed, a shadow she couldn't shake. Arden didn't wait for her answer. He showed up the next day, leaning against his beat-up truck in the driveway, all charm and menace. She met him outside, arms crossed, the wind tugging at her hair. "What do you want?" she demanded. "You," he said, simple, direct. "And a piece of this. I've been digging, Janie. Your husband's loaded, yeah, but there's whispers, shady stuff. Offshore accounts, locked rooms. You're in over your head. Her pulse quickened, Arden's words hitting too close to what she'd seen. You don't know anything, she said, but it sounded weak. I know enough, he countered, stepping closer. He's not what he seems. I can get you out. We split the cash, start over. Like old times. She laughed, a jagged sound. Old times were hell, Arden. And I'm not leaving. His eyes darkened and he grabbed her wrist, pulling her in. You will. I'll make sure of it. She yanked free, stumbling back, when Rhett's voice cut through the air. Let her go. He was there in the doorway, standing again, standing, his frame taut with fury. Arden froze, his jaw dropping, and Janelle's breath caught, the world tilting. What the... Arden started, but Rhett moved, fast, closing the distance, his legs steady until they weren't. He faltered, catching himself on the railing, his face tight with pain. Muscle spasms, he gritted out, glaring at Arden. Arden smirked, recovering. Spasms, huh? Sure, you're a freak show, man. She deserves better. Better's not you, Janelle snapped, stepping between them. Go, Arden. Now. He hesitated, his eyes flicking between them, then backed off, climbing into his truck. This ain't over, he called, peeling out, leaving dust and threats in his wake. Rhett sank back into his chair, his breathing ragged, and Janelle knelt beside him, her hands on his. You stood again, she said, soft, searching. He nodded, avoiding her gaze. It happens. Not what you think. Then what? She pressed, her voice breaking. Arden's digging, Rhett. He knows something's off. And I don't know what to believe anymore. He looked at her then, raw, vulnerable. Believe I'd never hurt you, he said, his hand cupping her face. That's all I can give you now. She leaned into him, tears spilling, and he kissed her, soft, desperate, a promise she wanted to trust. But Arden's words lingered, a poison seeping in, and as they pulled apart, she saw it in his eyes. He was still hiding something, and it was tearing them both apart. Janelle lingered in the doorway after Arden's truck roared away, the dust still settling in the driveway, Rhett's kiss still warm on her lips. His hand slipped from her face, his breath uneven as he sank deeper into his chair, exhaustion carving lines into his features. She wanted to believe him. I'd never hurt you. But Arden's venomous words coiled tight around her heart, twisting with every unanswered question. Rhett's legs, trembling but strong moments ago, mocked her trust. She watched him wheel inside, the hum fading down the hall, and the weight of doubt pressed heavier than ever. Arden didn't call again, but his threat, this ain't over, hung in the air, a storm waiting to break. Janelle paced the mansion that night, her bare feet silent on the marble, the crumpled note from Rhett, leave now, still tucked in her pocket beside the medical report she'd swiped from the West Wing. She traced its edges, her mind racing. Arden was digging, and she knew him. He'd claw through dirt until he struck gold or blood. She couldn't let him unravel this before she did. The next morning, Griffin found her in the kitchen, his hands jittery as he clutched a steaming mug. He hadn't been the same since Rhett's disappearance, skittish, hollow-eyed, like a man carrying too much. He set the mug down, spilling coffee across the counter, and didn't bother wiping it up. You're still here, he said, his voice low, almost accusing. Where else would I be? She shot back, crossing her arms. Rhett's back, Arden's sniffing around. I'm not running. Griffin's eyes darted to the doorway, then back to her, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm. You should. You don't know what you're in. Her pulse quickened, Arden's warnings echoing in his tone. Then tell me, she said, stepping closer. You've been scared of him since I got here. Why? He flinched, his mug clattering against the granite. It's not fear, he muttered, but his trembling hands said otherwise. He's not who he says he is, Janelle. You need to see it. See what? She pressed, her voice sharp. Spit it out, Griffin. He hesitated, his gaze flickering to the hall again, then pulled a small device from his pocket, a thumb drive, black and scuffed. This, he said, shoving it into her hand. Watch it? Alone? Then decide. She closed her fingers around it, the plastic cool against her skin. What's on it? Proof, he whispered, his voice cracking. But don't let him know I gave it to you. Please. Before she could ask more, he bolted, leaving her with the drive and a sinking feeling she couldn't shake. She slipped upstairs to her room, locking the door behind her, and plugged the drive into her laptop. The screen flickered, then steadied. A grainy video, time-stamped 3 weeks ago, the West Wing room stark under fluorescent light. Her breath hitched as Rhett appeared, not in his chair, but standing, pacing, his legs moving with the fluidity that stole the air from her lungs. He stopped, turned to the camera, unaware it was there, and spoke, his voice muffled but clear enough. It's almost time. The footage cut out, leaving her staring at a blank screen, her heart pounding against her ribs, standing, walking, talking. Not a spasm, not a glitch, deliberate, controlled. The medical report burned in her pocket, the photograph flashed in her mind, and the stranger's wild eyes tied it all together in a knot she couldn't untangle. She ripped the drive free, her hands shaking, and marched downstairs, fury and betrayal fueling every step. Rhett was in the study, papers spread across the desk, his pen scratching in that relentless rhythm. He didn't look up as she stormed in, slamming the door behind her. We need to talk, she said, her voice trembling with rage. Later, he said, his tone clipped, dismissive. No, she snapped, slamming the thumb drive onto the desk. Now. His pen stilled, his eyes lifting to the drive, then to her, narrowing. Where'd you get that? Doesn't matter, she said, leaning in, her hands braced on the desk. What matters is you've been lying. I saw you, Rhett, in the West Wing, walking, talking. No spasms, no excuses. Just say it. He leaned back, his face a wall of ice, but his fingers twitched, barely, but she caught it. You don't know what you saw, he said, his voice low, steady, too steady. She laughed, harsh and jagged. I saw you walk, Rhett. I saw you stand like it was nothing. Just say it. Say you've been faking. Say it's all a lie. Say something. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stared at her with those gray eyes that once pulled her in and now pushed her away. It's not what you think, he said finally, each word measured, carved from stone. Then what is it? She shouted, her voice breaking. Because I'm drowning here, Rhett. I've given you everything. My trust, my heart, and you keep shutting me out. The room, the stranger, the footage. What are you hiding? He stood, slow and deliberate, his chair pushed aside, and she stumbled back, her breath catching. He towered over the desk, his legs steady, his face tight with something she couldn't read, anger, regret, maybe both. You want the truth? He said, his voice dropping to a growl. You can't handle it, not yet. Try me, she shot back, tears burning her eyes. I've handled your lies. I've handled Arden. I've handled this house tearing me apart. Give me something real. He stepped around the desk, closing the distance, and for a moment she thought he'd reach for her, pull her in like he had before. But he stopped, his hands flexing at his sides. I'm protecting you, he said, softer now, but it didn't land right. It sounded like a shield, not a confession. From what? She whispered, her chest aching. Me loving you, or you loving me? His jaw clenched and he turned away, sinking back into his chair like the effort of standing had drained him. Go, Janelle, he said, his voice flat again, the wall rebuilt. We're done here. She didn't move, her feet rooted, her heart splintering. No, she said, quiet but firm. You don't get to shut down. Not this time. He didn't respond, just picked up his pen and resumed writing, the scratch of it deafening in the silence. She stood there, trembling, until the fight drained out of her, leaving only exhaustion and a hollow ache. She left the drive on the desk and walked out, the door clicking shut behind her, a finality she hated. That night the mansion roared with noise, thuds, groans, a scream that jolted her awake. She didn't run to it this time. She curled into herself, the footage replaying in her mind. Rhett's refusal a fresh wound. Griffin's warning, he's not who he says he is, gnawed at her, and she wondered if she'd ever known him at all. The next day she found Griffin in the garage, his hands buried in an engine, grease streaking his arms. He flinched when she approached, his eyes darting to her like she'd caught him stealing. "You watched it," he said, not a question. "Yeah," she said, her voice raw. "And he won't talk. What's he hiding, Griffin? Who's the stranger? Why's he walking?" Griffin wiped his hands on a rag, his movements jerky. I shouldn't have given it to you. He'll kill me if he finds out." "He won't," she said, stepping closer. "But I need to know. Please." He shook his head, backing away. "It's bigger than you think. The West Wing, the money, it's all tied up. He's not paralyzed, Janelle. Never was. But it's not a game. It's—" He stopped, his eyes wide, and bolted past her, disappearing into the house. She didn't chase him. Her legs wouldn't move. Never was. The words sank into her, cold and heavy, and she slid to the floor, the concrete biting into her knees. Rhett wasn't just lying, he was living a fiction, and she'd married it. Loved it. The stranger, the footage, Arden's digging. It was all closing in, and she didn't know if she'd survive the truth. That evening she heard his chair in the hall, slow, deliberate, like he was waiting for her to come out. She didn't. She locked her door, her heart pounding, and pulled the medical report from her pocket, scanning it again. Dates, treatments, a name she didn't recognize. It wasn't enough, but it was something. She'd confront him again, she decided, when she could breathe without breaking. But the scream came again that night, louder, closer, and she knew, whatever Rhett was hiding, it wasn't staying hidden much longer. Janelle sat on the edge of her bed, the scream from the night before still ringing in her ears, her fingers tracing the creases of the medical report she'd clutched like a lifeline. The mansion's noises had quieted, but the silence was worse, thick, suffocating, a void where answers should have been. Griffin's words, "He's not paralyzed, never was," clawed at her, tearing through the fragile trust she'd built with Rhett. She'd locked her door against him, against the hum of his chair in the hall, but it didn't stop the ache in her chest, the pull to confront him again. She couldn't hide forever. The next morning she found him in the dining room, alone, his breakfast untouched, his hands folded in his lap. He didn't look up as she entered, but his shoulders tensed, a silent acknowledgement. She dropped the medical report onto the table, the paper landing with a soft thud between them. "Talk," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "No more lies, Rhett. I'm done waiting." He stared at the report, his jaw tight, then lifted his eyes to hers, gray, stormy, unguarded for the first time. "You won't like it," he said, his voice low, rough like it hurt to speak. "I don't like this," she shot back, gesturing to the space between them. "The secrets, the footage, you standing when you shouldn't. Griffin showed me, Rhett, you walking in that room. So stop hiding and tell me who you are." He exhaled, a sharp, jagged sound, and pushed the report aside, his fingers lingering on its edge. "Sit," he said, softer now, almost pleading. "Please." She didn't want to give him an inch, but her legs betrayed her, folding into the chair across from him. The air crackled, heavy with what he hadn't said, and she waited, her heart pounding against her ribs. "I wasn't lying about everything," he started, his gaze dropping to his hands. "The accident, It happened 5 years ago. A car crash. My legs were shattered, bones and nerves torn apart. Doctors said I'd never walk again. They were right. For a while. She leaned forward, her breath catching. But you do. I've seen it. He nodded, slow, deliberate. I recovered. Not fully, never fully, but enough. More than anyone knows, except Griffin. And now you. Her mind spun, the footage replaying, his steady steps, his voice. It's almost time. Then why the chair? She asked, her voice trembling. Why pretend? He looked up, his eyes locking onto hers, and she saw it. Pain, raw and deep, carved into him like a scar. Because of Verna, he said, the name dropping like a stone. My aunt. She staged it. The crash. Wanted me out of the way. Janelle's stomach twisted, the room tilting. Out of the way for what? The company, he said, his voice hardening. Callahan Industries. My father built it, left it to me when he died. Verna was next in line, his sister, but she wasn't content to wait. She thought if I was gone or broken, she'd take it. The crash was her move. She stared at him, the pieces shifting, not quite fitting. But you survived. Barely, he said, a bitter smile flickering. I was in a coma for weeks. When I woke up, I couldn't move, couldn't fight. She swooped in, started pulling strings, board meetings, proxies, anything to edge me out. I was too weak to stop her, so I didn't. I let her think she'd won. And the chair, she pressed, her voice rising. You've been faking it all this time. Not all, he said, his hand brushing the armrest, a reflex. At first it was real. I couldn't walk, couldn't stand. But I pushed. Secret rehab, treatments she didn't know about. Took years, Janelle. Years of pain, hiding, rebuilding. By the time I could, she'd already taken too much. The chair became my shield. If she knew I was whole, she'd finish what she started. Her throat tightened, anger and pity warring inside her. So you lied to everyone. To me. I had to, he said, leaning forward, his voice urgent. The inheritance, it's tied to the company. A trust my father set up. I needed a wife to secure it, keep her from contesting it legally. You were a transaction, she finished, the word bitter on her tongue. You said that. But it's more now, isn't it? He didn't answer, just held her gaze, and she saw the crack. Desire, regret, something she'd felt in his kiss, his touch. Yes, he said finally, quiet like a confession. More than I wanted it to be. She stood, pacing, her hands raking through her hair. And the West Wing? The stranger? Griffin's footage? He exhaled, rubbing his face. The stranger, he's a loose end. A private investigator I hired to track Verna's moves. She got to him, turned him. I've been keeping him there, trying to figure out what he told her. The footage, Griffin wasn't supposed to record that. I was planning, Janelle, timing it. Verna's close, too close. I needed her to think I'm still weak. Her knees buckled, and she gripped the table, steadying herself. So this whole marriage, this house, it's a chess game. And I'm what, a pawn? No, he said, sharp, standing again, slow, wincing but steady. He crossed to her, his hands hovering near her shoulders. You're the one thing I didn't plan. I didn't expect. He stopped, his voice breaking. I didn't expect you. She laughed, a choked, desperate sound, tears spilling over. You expect me to believe that? After everything? Believe what you want, he said, his hands dropping. But it's the truth. I've been running from her, from this, for years. You're the first thing that's made me want to stop. She stared at him, his face close, his breath warm against her skin, and the walls she'd built trembled. Then why shut me out? She whispered. Why push me away? Because I'm scared, he admitted, raw, unguarded. Not of her, of losing you when you see all of me. She reached for him, her fingers brushing his jaw, and he didn't pull back. "I've seen enough," she said, her voice steady now. "And I'm still here." He kissed her then, fierce and tender, his hands cupping her face like she'd vanish if he let go. She melted into it, the truth sinking in. His accident, his aunt, his fight. And it didn't erase the hurt, but it shifted it, made it bearable. They broke apart, foreheads pressed together, and she felt the weight of him, real and broken and hers. But the peace didn't last. A crash shattered the silence, glass breaking downstairs, followed by a shout. Rhett tensed, his eyes darting to the door. "Stay here," he said, moving for his chair, but she grabbed his arm. "No," she said, firm. "We're done with that." He nodded, reluctant, and they went together, his steps uneven but determined, her hand in his. The foyer was chaos. Griffin sprawled on the floor, blood trickling from his temple, Arden standing over him, a shard of broken vase in his hand. "Janie," Arden said, his grin wild, dangerous. "Told you I'd be back." Rhett stepped forward, shielding her, his voice low. "Get out. Now." Arden laughed, tossing the shard aside. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere. Not till I get what's mine. And look at you, standing tall. Guess the rumors were right." Janelle's heart sank, Arden's words confirming her fear. He dug deep, too deep. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "You," he said, his eyes glinting. "And a cut of this. Heard your husband's got enemies. Figured I'd make some friends." "Verna," Rhett muttered, his face paling. "You've been talking to her." Arden shrugged, smug. "She pays better than you, wants you gone, cripple or not. And I want Janie. Win-win." Rhett lunged, faster than she'd seen, tackling Arden to the floor. They grappled, fists flying, and Janelle rushed to Griffin, shaking him awake. "Get up," she hissed, her hands slick with his blood. "We need help." Griffin groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "I tried. Warned you." "I know," she said, pulling him up. "Stay with me." The fight ended quick, Rhett pinning Arden, his knee on his chest, breathing hard. "You're done," he growled, but Arden just grinned, blood staining his teeth. "Too late," he said, coughing. "She's coming." Rhett hauled him up, dragging him to the door, and shoved him out, locking it behind him. He turned to Janelle, his face bruised, his legs trembling. "We need to move," he said, urgent. "Verna's close, closer than I thought." She nodded, her mind racing, Griffin's weight heavy against her. The truth was out, Rhett's past, his fight. But it wasn't over. Verna loomed, Arden lingered, and the mansion's shadows stretched longer, darker, promising a reckoning she wasn't sure they'd survive. Janelle's hands shook as she steadied Griffin against the foyer wall, his blood smearing her fingers, the chaos of Arden's attack still pulsing through her. Rhett stood by the locked door, his chest heaving, his legs trembling from the fight, but holding firm. No chair, no pretense, just him, raw and exposed. The truth he'd spilled, Verna's staged accident, his years of hiding, burned in her mind, a jagged edge she couldn't smooth over. Arden's parting words, "She's coming," rang like a bell, and the air felt charged, heavy with the storm they couldn't outrun. "We need to get Griffin upstairs," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "He's hurt." Rhett nodded, crossing to them, his steps uneven but determined. He took Griffin's other arm, and together they half-carried him up the stairs, his groans filling the silence. They settled him in a guest room, Janelle pressing a towel to his temple, while Rhett paced, his hands flexing like he was still fighting. "She knows," he said, abrupt, his voice rough. "Verna. Arden wouldn't be here if she didn't." Janelle looked up, the towel damp with blood. "Knows what? That you're walking?" "Yeah," he said, stopping, his eyes dark. "It's over. The shield's gone." She stood, wiping her hands, her heart pounding. Then we fight her. You've got the company, the trust, me. She can't just... She can, he cut in, sharp. She's been waiting for this. I've been a ghost too long, Janelle. The board's restless. She'll use it. Griffin stirred, his voice weak. She's got people, spies. Arden's just the start. Rhett's jaw tightened and he turned away, staring out the window into the gathering dusk. Janelle crossed to him, her hand brushing his arm. We'll figure it out, she said, soft but firm. Together. He didn't respond, just leaned into her touch, a silent agreement. But the quiet shattered with the shrill ring of his phone, vibrating on the table. He grabbed it, his face hardening as he read the screen. It's her, he said, and answered, his voice cold. Verna. Janelle couldn't hear the other side, but Rhett's expression told her enough. Fury, then fear, then a grim resolve. You're bluffing, he said, his grip tightening. No one's buying it. A pause, then. Tomorrow. Fine. He hung up, tossing the phone down like it burned. What? She demanded, stepping closer. What did she say? He exhaled, rubbing his face. She knows I'm walking, claims she's got proof. Medical records, witnesses. She's calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow. Wants me there. Her stomach dropped. To do what? To take it all, he said, his voice low, bitter. She's setting a trap. The next morning came too fast, the sky gray and heavy, mirroring the weight on Janelle's shoulders. Rhett dressed in silence, suit sharp, tie knotted tight, no chair in sight. He stood in the foyer, testing his legs, wincing with each step but refusing help. I have to face her like this, he said, catching her watching. No hiding. She nodded, her throat tight, and grabbed his hand. I'm coming with you. No, he said, quick, pulling back. It's too dangerous. I'm your wife, she cut in, firm. Not just on paper. I'm in this, Rhett. All of it. He stared at her, then nodded, a flicker of something warm breaking through the storm in his eyes. They drove to the city in silence, the Callahan Industries tower looming ahead, all glass and steel, a fortress Verna aimed to claim. The boardroom was on the top floor, a cavern of polished wood and stern faces, 12 men and women seated around a massive table. Verna stood at the head, tall and severe, her silver hair pulled tight, her smile a blade. Rhett, she said, her voice smooth, venomous. You're looking upright. He didn't flinch, just took his seat, Janelle beside him, her hand on his under the table. Let's skip the games, he said, his tone flat. What's this about? Verna's smile widened and she slid a stack of files across the table, papers fanning out, photos, reports, a grainy still of Rhett standing in the West Wing. Janelle's breath caught, recognizing the footage Griffin had shown her. This, Verna said, is about fraud. Deception. You've lied to us, to the company, for years, pretending to be crippled while you schemed behind our backs. The board murmured, eyes narrowing, and Rhett's grip tightened on Janelle's hand. I was injured, he said, steady. You know that. Recovery's not a crime. Recovery? Verna laughed, sharp and cold. You hid it, played the victim. And then there's her. She pointed at Janelle, her gaze piercing. Your little wife. A gold digger seducing you for a cut of the wealth. The marriage is a sham. Convenient timing, don't you think? Janelle's face burned, anger flaring. That's a lie, she snapped, standing. I didn't. Sit down, Verna cut in, her voice a whip. We've got statements. Your ex, Arden, was quite chatty. Said you'd do anything for money. Hospital bills, rent. Sound familiar? The room tilted, Arden's betrayal sinking in like a blade. Janelle sank back into her chair, her hands trembling, and Rhett squeezed her fingers, his voice low. She's clean, Verna. You're reaching. Am I? Verna said, tossing another file down. Bank records. Janelle's name bolded. Payments from Rhett's account. Looks like a payoff to me. The board deserves better than a fraud, and his bought bride. The murmurs grew louder, chairs shifting, and a gray-haired man, Harrington, the chairman, cleared his throat. This is serious, Rhett. If you've misled us, hidden your condition, manipulated the trust, we need proof it's not true, or you're out. Rhett stood, slow, his legs steady despite the strain, and faced them. I was injured, he said, his voice rising raw. Verna staged it, tried to kill me. I hid my recovery to survive her. The chair wasn't a lie then, and it's not now. It's strategy. Janelle's not a fraud. She's my wife, and I'll prove it. Verna smirked, unfazed. Prove it how? Your word, hers. We've got evidence. You've got nothing. I've got the truth, he shot back, turning to Janelle. And her. Harrington leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Truth's not enough. We need documents, witnesses, something solid. You've got until tomorrow. If not, we vote you out. Verna takes interim control. The room erupted, voices clashing, and Verna's smile held, triumphant. Rhett grabbed Janelle's hand, pulling her out, his steps faltering as they hit the hall. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard, and she steadied him, her heart racing. She's got them, he said, his voice rough. Arden sold us out. She's been planning this. Then we fight, Janelle said, fierce, her hands on his face. We've got Griffin, the P. I dash something. We can't let her win. He nodded, pulling her close, his lips brushing her forehead. I don't deserve you, he murmured, and she felt the weight of him, the man she'd fallen for beneath the lies. They drove back in tense silence, the mansion looming ahead, a fortress under siege. Griffin met them at the door, his temple bandaged, his eyes wide. She called, he said, frantic. Verna said she's coming here tonight. Rhett cursed, his hands flexing. She's moving fast. Wants to finish it. Janelle's mind raced, Arden's betrayal, Verna's trap closing in. What do we do? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear. Get everything, Rhett said, turning to Griffin. The PI's files, my rehab records, anything we've got. We'll bury her. Griffin nodded, darting off, and Rhett pulled Janelle into the study, locking the door. If she comes, he said, his voice low, you stay out of it. Promise me. No, she said, defiant, her hands on his chest. I'm with you, all the way. He kissed her, hard, desperate, and she felt the truth in it, his fight, her strength, their bond forged in chaos. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, and they broke apart, breathless, ready for the war Verna was bringing to their door. The doorbell's sharp chime cut through the study like a blade, and Janelle's heart lurched as Rhett pulled away from their kiss, his hands lingering on her face for a fleeting second before dropping. Verna was here, her trap snapping shut, and the air crackled with the weight of it. Griffin burst in, his arms full of files, his face pale beneath the bandage. She's outside, he panted, dropping the papers onto the desk. Car's in the drive. She's not alone. Rhett's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to Janelle, then to the mess of evidence. Rehab records, the PI's notes, scraps of a defense they hadn't had time to build. Get it organized, he told Griffin, his voice low, urgent. We've got minutes. Janelle stepped forward, her hands steady despite the chaos in her chest. I'll help. We can... No, Rhett cut in, sharp, turning to her. You're out of this. She froze, his words a slap. What? He crossed to her, his steps firm despite the faint tremble in his legs, and gripped her shoulders, his eyes stormy, desperate. You need to go, Janelle, now before she walks in. I'm not leaving, she said, her voice rising, shaking him off. We're in this together. You said it yourself. Not anymore, he said, his tone hardening. but his hands betrayed him, trembling as they fell to his sides. She'll destroy you. Fraud, seduction. She's got Arden's lies, the board's doubt. I won't let her touch you. She already has, Janelle shot back, tears burning her eyes. I'm your wife, Rhett. I signed up for this. For you. He flinched, his face twisting with something raw, love, fear, guilt, and he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I know. That's why you have to go. I can't lose you to her. Not like this. Her breath caught, the weight of his words sinking in, but she shook her head, defiant. You don't get to decide that. I'm staying. No, you're not, he said, louder now, his hands clenching into fists. Get out, Janelle. I don't want you here. The room spun, his rejection cutting deeper than Verna's accusations. You don't mean that, she whispered, searching his face for the man who'd kissed her, who'd confessed his truth. I do, he said, turning away, his back a wall she couldn't breach. Go. Now. The doorbell rang again, insistent, and Griffin shifted, his eyes darting between them. Rhett, she's... Handle it, Rhett snapped, not looking at her. Janelle, leave, please. She stood there, trembling, tears spilling over, but his silence was louder than her pleas. She grabbed her bag from the corner, her movements jerky, and stormed out, the door slamming behind her. The last thing she saw was Rhett's shoulders slump, his head bowing as Verna's voice, smooth, triumphant, filtered through the foyer. Janelle drove blind, tears blurring the road, her chest hollowed out. She didn't know where she was going until she pulled into Brielle's apartment complex, the engine ticking as it cooled. Brielle opened the door, her sharp edges softening at the sight of Janelle's red-rimmed eyes. Girl, what happened? Brielle asked, pulling her inside, her voice all warmth and steel. Janelle collapsed onto the couch, the story spilling out. Verna's trap, Rhett's confession, his push to protect her. He threw me out, she said, her voice breaking. After everything, he just let me go. Brielle sat beside her, her hand on Janelle's knee. He's an idiot, but he's scared, Janelle, scared of losing you to that snake. He already has, she said, wiping her face. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. No, you're not, Brielle said, firm, her eyes glinting. You love him. I saw it the day you signed that contract, and he loves you. Pushing you away doesn't change that. Janelle shook her head, exhaustion seeping in. It's over, Brielle. Verna's got the board. Arden's got her back. I'm just collateral. Brielle leaned in, her voice fierce. Then fight back. For love, for you, for whatever's left. You don't walk away from something real because it's hard. I don't know if I can, Janelle whispered, her hand drifting to her stomach, a faint nausea she'd ignored for days stirring there, unnoticed, unnamed. You can, Brielle said, squeezing her hand, and you will. Rest here tonight. Tomorrow, we figure it out. Janelle nodded, too tired to argue, and curled up on the couch, sleep claiming her fast. She didn't feel the shift yet, the life growing inside her, a secret she didn't know she carried. But it was there, quiet, waiting. Back at the mansion, Rhett stood alone in the study, the files scattered, Verna's visit a blur of accusations and threats. She'd swept in with 2 board members, Harrington and a woman named Claire, her evidence laid out like a guillotine, the footage, Arden's testimony, forged bank records. He's unfit, she'd declared, her voice cutting through the room. A liar and a manipulator. I'll take the company forward. Rhett had fought, his rehab records, the PI's shaky affidavit. But it wasn't enough. Harrington's ultimatum held proof by morning, or he was out. Verna left with a smirk, promising to return, and Griffin hovered, guilt etched into his face. I'm sorry, he muttered, but Rhett waved him off, his mind elsewhere. He sank into his chair, not the wheelchair, but the desk chair, his legs aching from standing too long, his heart heavier than his body. Janelle's absence was a void. Her tear-streaked face burned into him. He'd pushed her away to shield her, to keep Verna's claws from sinking deeper, but it felt like betrayal. His own, not hers. The house creaked around him, empty, and he buried his face in his hands, isolation swallowing him whole. Days bled into weeks. Janelle stayed with Brielle, her days numb, her nights restless. The nausea grew, a quiet insistence she couldn't ignore, and one morning a test confirmed it. 2 pink lines, a truth she hadn't seen coming. Pregnant. Rhett's child. Her hand trembled as she held the stick, love and fear crashing together. She didn't tell Brielle, not yet, just sat with it, the weight of it anchoring her to him even as she tried to let go. Rhett didn't call, didn't reach out. Griffin did once, his voice hushed over the phone. He's a mess, Janelle. Locked himself in the study. Verna's got the board on edge. He's got nothing left to fight with. Then he shouldn't have pushed me out, she said, her voice flat, but her chest ached. He thinks he's saving you, Griffin said. Always has. She hung up, tears spilling, and Brielle found her like that, curled on the floor. Enough, Brielle said, kneeling beside her. You're falling apart and he's drowning. You've got more to fight for than you're saying. Don't deny it. Janelle's hand drifted to her stomach, and Brielle's eyes widened, understanding dawning. Oh, honey, she said, pulling her close. You're not doing this alone, but you can't let him give up. Not on you, not on that. I don't know how to reach him, Janelle admitted, her voice small. He's gone, Brielle, in every way. Then make him see, Brielle said, fierce. Go back. Fight for him. For love. For whatever's growing in you. He's worth it. And so are you. Janelle nodded, wiping her face, resolve hardening. She didn't know if Rhett would take her back, if Verna had already won. But she couldn't let it end like this. Not with his child inside her, not with the love she still felt, sharp and unyielding. She packed her bag, her heart pounding, and drove to the mansion, the sky dark with coming rain. Rhett sat in the study, the room a tomb of papers and silence, his phone dead on the desk. The board's deadline had passed. Verna's victory loomed, the company slipping through his fingers. But he didn't care. Not anymore. Janelle's absence was the real loss, a wound he'd inflicted himself. He heard the door creak open, assumed it was Griffin, and didn't look up. Rhett, she said, her voice soft, breaking through the haze. He froze, his head snapping up. She stood there, rain-damp and fierce, her eyes red but steady. Janelle, he breathed, standing, his legs shaky but holding. Why? Because I love you, she cut in, crossing to him, her hands fisting in his shirt. And you don't get to push me away. Not for her, not for anything. He stared at her, his walls crumbling, and pulled her close, his voice rough. I thought I was protecting you. You weren't, she said, tears spilling. You broke me. But I'm here, and I'm not leaving. He kissed her, desperate, hungry, and she felt it, the truth, the fight, the love he'd buried. I'm sorry, he whispered against her lips, for everything. Then fix it, she said, pulling back, her hand on her stomach. For us. All 3 of us. His eyes widened, realization dawning, and he sank to his knees, his hands framing her waist, tears streaking his face. A baby? He asked, voice breaking. Yeah, she said, smiling through her own tears. So fight, Rhett, with me. He nodded, rising, pulling her into his arms, and the mansion's silence broke with their shared breath. A new beginning forged in the wreckage. Verna still loomed, the board's decision hung, but they'd face it together. Unbroken, at last. And here's something I can't stop thinking about. Do you believe people hide their truth to protect others, or to manipulate them? Let's talk about this in the comments because I'm still thinking about it myself. Janelle clung to Rhett in the study, his arms tight around her, his tears damp against her neck as the revelation of their child settled between them. The rain battered the mansion's windows, a relentless drumbeat matching her pulse, but in his embrace the chaos felt distant. Verna's threats, Arden's betrayal, the board's deadline, all muted by the promise of their future. He pulled back, his hands framing her face, his gray eyes fierce with a resolve she hadn't seen since the night they'd first kissed. "We'll fight," he said, his voice steady, raw. "For you, for us. I'm done running." She nodded, her hand resting on her stomach, a quiet strength blooming there. "Then we start now," she said, glancing at the scattered files on the desk. Griffin's evidence, the PI's notes, scraps of a defense they'd nearly lost. "Verna's coming for you tomorrow. We need a plan." He kissed her forehead, lingering, then turned to the papers, his jaw set. "We've got enough. Barely. But it'll have to do." They worked through the night, Griffin joining them with a limp and a determined nod, the three of them piecing together a counterattack. Medical records proving Rhett's initial injury, the PI's affidavit linking Verna to the crash, bank statements exposing her own shady dealings. It wasn't airtight, but it was something, a lifeline to pull Rhett back from the edge. As dawn broke, gray and heavy, Janelle squeezed his hand, her voice firm. "We end this today." He nodded, standing tall beside her, his legs shaky but unbowed. Together. The board meeting was set for noon at Callahan Industries, and Janelle drove, her nerves steel despite the flutter in her chest. Not just fear, but the faint stir of life inside her, a secret fueling her fire. Rhett sat beside her, silent, his suit crisp, his wheelchair left behind at the mansion. He'd walk in, he'd said, no matter the cost. She believed him. The tower loomed ahead, all glass and steel, a battlefield dressed as a corporate throne. They stepped into the elevator, the ascent slow, suffocating, and Rhett gripped her hand, his palm warm against hers. "If this goes wrong," he started, his voice low, "you get out. Take care of yourself. The baby." "No," she said, sharp, turning to him. "We win. All of us." The doors slid open and the boardroom stretched before them, a long table flanked by stern faces, Verna at the head like a queen claiming her crown. Her silver hair gleamed under the lights, her smile sharp as she gestured to the files spread before her. Rhett's footage, Arden's statements, her forged proof of fraud. The board murmured, tension thick, and Harrington, the chairman, stood, his gaze cold. "You're late," he said, eyeing Rhett, "and Verna's made her case. It's not looking good." Rhett stepped forward, his legs steady, but Janelle caught the faint wince he hid. "I'm here now," he said, his voice clear, cutting through the room. "And I've got something to say." Verna laughed, a brittle sound, leaning back in her chair. "What's this? No chair today, Rhett? Finally dropping the act?" He ignored her, turning to the board, but before he could speak, the doors burst open again, and Janelle strode in, her timing deliberate, her bag slung over her shoulder, the files clutched tight. She'd slipped out during the drive, telling Rhett she'd join him later, a plan she'd kept quiet until now. His eyes widened, a flicker of panic, but she held his gaze, steady, resolute. "Janelle," Verna said, her smile faltering. "How quaint. Come to beg for your husband's scraps." "No," Janelle said, her voice ringing out as she dropped the files onto the table, papers spilling across the polished wood. "I'm here to bury you." The room stilled, every eye on her, and she stepped forward, her hands steady despite the storm inside. "You've accused me of fraud," she said, her tone sharp, unwavering. "Said I seduced Rhett for his money. But you're the fraud, Verna, and I've got proof." Verna's smirk faded, her hands tightening on the armrests. Bluffing won't save him, dear. The board's seen everything. His lies, your greed. Then let them see this, Janelle said, pulling the PI's affidavit from the pile, holding it up. This man, hired by Rhett, tracked your moves, Verna. Found evidence you staged the crash that nearly killed him 5 years ago. Dates, payments, a mechanic you bribed to cut the brakes. It's all here. The board shifted, whispers rising, and Harrington reached for the paper, his brow furrowing as he scanned it. Verna stood, her voice rising. Fabrication. He's desperate, and she's complicit. Keep going, Janelle cut in, tossing down bank records next. These show your accounts, offshore, hidden, siphoning company funds for years. You didn't just want Rhett out. You wanted it all. And Arden, my ex, you paid him to lie, to frame us. His signature's on the wire transfers. Verna's face paled, her hands trembling, but she rallied, her voice icy. You're a nobody, Janelle. No one's buying this. They will, Rhett said, stepping forward, his voice a low growl that silenced the room. He moved beside Janelle, standing tall, his legs firm despite the strain, and the board gasped, audible, sharp, a ripple of shock. Because it's true, I was injured, crippled, by her hand. I hid my recovery to survive her. She's the liar, the thief, and I'm done letting her take what's mine. He turned to the board, his gaze sweeping over them, commanding. You want proof? Here I am, standing, fighting. Verna's spent years undermining me, the company, my father's legacy. Janelle's not a fraud. She's my wife, my partner, and she's saved me. You've got the records. Decide. The room erupted, voices clashing. Harrington barking for order, Claire flipping through the files, others shouting questions. Verna lunged for the papers, her composure cracking. This is absurd. He's manipulating you all, her too. Enough, Harrington snapped, slamming his hand on the table. We've seen your evidence, Verna, fakes and half-truths. These, he held up Janelle's files. Check out, dates align, signatures match. You're done. Verna froze, her eyes wild, and Janelle stepped closer to Rhett, her hand finding his, their fingers locking. The board deliberated, voices low, tense, and Harrington stood again, his face grim but decisive. Rhett, you stay. Verna, you're out. Pending investigation. We'll sort the legal mess, but the company's his. Verna's scream was sharp, guttural, as she swept the files off the table, papers scattering. You'll regret this, she hissed, storming out, her heels clicking a furious retreat. The room settled, the board dispersing with nods and murmurs, and Rhett turned to Janelle, his face softening, awe breaking through the exhaustion. You came back, he said, his voice rough, pulling her close. You didn't have to. I did, she said, her arms around him, tears spilling. For you. For us. He kissed her, deep, fierce, the boardroom fading around them, and she felt his strength, not just in his legs, but in the man he'd become with her. They left hand in hand, the tower behind them, Verna's empire crumbling in their wake. Back at the mansion, they collapsed onto the couch, Griffin hovering with a relieved grin. You did it, he said, clapping Rhett's shoulder. She's gone. Not yet, Rhett said, his arm around Janelle, his voice steady. She'll fight dirty, lawsuits, maybe worse, but we've got time now. And each other, Janelle added, her hand on her stomach, the secret she'd held spilling out. All three of us. Griffin's eyes widened, then softened. A kid. Damn. Congrats, Rhett laughed, a sound she hadn't heard in too long, and pulled her closer, his lips brushing her temple. We're free, he murmured, and she believed him, not just from Verna, but from the shadows they'd both carried. Weeks later, the dust settled, Verna's accounts frozen, Arden vanished, the board solidified behind Rhett. Janelle moved back in, her things blending with his, the mansion no longer a cage but a home. She stood in the nursery they'd started, bare walls, a crib half-built, and felt him behind her, his arms slipping around her waist. "We made it," he said, his voice warm against her ear. "Yeah," she said, leaning into him, her hand over his. "We did?" The future stretched ahead, bright, uncertain, theirs. And as they stood there, I couldn't help wondering, do you think people hide their truth to protect others or to manipulate them? Let's talk about it in the comments, because I'm still turning it over in my head. Janelle leaned into Rhett in the half-finished nursery, his arms warm around her, the crib's wooden slats a quiet promise of the life they were building. Verna's defeat still echoed, her empire fractured, the board firmly in Rhett's hands. But the victory felt fragile, tempered by the scars they both carried. She rested her hand on her stomach, the baby's presence a secret she'd shared only with him and Griffin, a tether to the future they'd fought for. Rhett's breath was steady against her ear, his words, "We're free," a vow she held close, but she felt the weight he still bore, the guilt he hadn't shaken. The next morning he was gone when she woke, a note on the pillow in his sharp scrawl, "Be back soon. Trust me." Her stomach fluttered, nerves, not the baby, and she paced the mansion, the quiet, unnerving after weeks of chaos. Griffin found her in the kitchen, his grin crooked but genuine. "He's up to something," he said, pouring coffee. "Won't tell me what." "He better not be running again," she said, half joking, but her chest tightened. "Nah," Griffin replied, handing her a mug. "He's done with that." "You'll see." Hours later, her phone buzzed, a text from Rhett. "Turn on the news." She fumbled for the remote, the TV flickering to life, and there he was, standing in front of Callahan Industries, a crowd of reporters gathered, cameras flashing. He looked steady, his suit sharp, but his eyes held a softness she recognized, a vulnerability he'd only shown her. Her breath caught as he stepped to the podium, his voice clear, carrying through the screen. "I've got something to say," he began, the crowd hushing. "Not about the company, not about the fight you've all heard about my wife, Janelle." Her knees weakened and she sank onto the couch, clutching the remote. Griffin hovered, silent, watching. "I hurt her," Rhett continued, his voice roughening. "Pushed her away when she deserved better. I hid who I was, my legs, my recovery, my fear, thinking it'd protect her. It didn't. It broke her trust, and I'll carry that regret forever. She stood by me, fought for me, when I didn't deserve it. She's the strongest person I know, and I'm sorry, Janelle. Publicly, completely. I'm sorry." Tears blurred her vision, his words slicing through the walls she'd rebuilt. He paused, his hands gripping the podium, then stepped back, pulling something from his pocket, a small box. The crowd murmured, and her heart stopped as he opened it, revealing a ring. Not the contract band, but something new, simple, shining. "I asked her to marry me once," he said, looking straight into the camera, straight at her. "It was a deal, a transaction. I'm asking again now, no contract, no terms, just me, loving you, if you'll have me." The reporters erupted, questions flying, but he waved them off, stepping away, his face raw with hope and fear. Janelle dropped the remote, her hands trembling, and Griffin whistled low. "Go," he said, nudging her. "He's waiting." She didn't hesitate. She drove to the tower, her pulse racing, the ring on her finger, the old one, feeling heavy, temporary. The crowd parted as she arrived, Rhett standing by the entrance, alone now, his eyes locking onto hers. She ran to him, tears streaming, and he caught her, his arms tight, his breath hitching. "You meant it?" she asked, her voice breaking, pulling back to search his face. "Every word," he said, his hands framing her cheeks. "I love you, Janelle. No more hiding. Marry me. Really marry me." She laughed, a sob catching in her throat, and nodded. Yes, but there's something you need to know. He frowned, his hands stilling, and she took his palm, pressing it to her stomach. I'm pregnant, she said, soft, steady. Your baby. His eyes widened, then filled, tears spilling over as he sank to his knees, his forehead against her waist. A baby, he whispered, his voice cracking, his shoulders shaking. God, Janelle. She knelt with him, her arms around his neck, and he broke, sobs wrenching free, years of pain and guilt pouring out. I don't deserve this, he choked, clinging to her. You do, she said, fierce, pulling him up, kissing him through their tears. We both do. The crowd watched, hushed, but it didn't matter. They were alone in that moment, their confession sealing what the contract never could. He slipped the new ring onto her finger, the old one discarded, and they stood hand in hand, the world fading around them. Months later, the beach stretched wide before them, the sun dipping low, painting the waves gold. Janelle sat on a blanket, her hair loose, the wind tugging at it, while Rhett crouched nearby, his legs steady now, stronger from months of open recovery. No more secrets, no more chair. Their daughter, Lila, gurgled in his arms, 6 months old, her tiny hands grabbing at his face. He laughed, a sound Janelle cherished, free and unguarded, and she smiled, her heart full in a way she hadn't known it could be. She's got your eyes, he said, settling beside her, Lila nestled between them. The sand was warm beneath her, the tide a steady rhythm, and she leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. And your stubbornness, she teased, brushing Lila's dark curls. He grinned, kissing her temple, his arm around her. Good thing she's got you to balance it. They sat in silence, watching the horizon, the mansion, a distant memory now. They'd sold it, moved to a smaller house by the coast, a fresh start untainted by Verna's shadow. She was gone, jailed after her schemes unraveled fully, Arden vanishing with her fall, and the company thrived under Rhett's steady hand. But this quiet, this family, was what mattered. I didn't expect this, he said, his voice soft, tracing Lila's fingers. Love. Not like this. Me either, she admitted, turning to him. I thought it'd break me. You, the lies, all of it. But it's everything now? He nodded, his eyes glistening, and kissed her, slow, deep, Lila cooing between them. Everything, he echoed, and she felt it. The love they'd stumbled into, fought for, built from wreckage. The sun sank lower, the waves whispering against the shore, and Janelle rested her hand on his, Lila's warmth binding them. It wasn't the story they'd planned, her desperate deal, his guarded heart, but it was theirs, real and whole. Love hadn't been what they expected. It had become everything they needed. Have you ever loved someone who hurt you, but still wanted to give them a second chance? Tell me your story in the comments. You never know who you might inspire. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more stories. See you in the next one.